I'm delighted to introduce our speaker tonight, Daniel Bohlman. Daniel is the Deputy Director of the Land Conservancy of San Luis Obispo County. When he's not saving land, Daniel can be found playing music, fishing, and tromping about with his wife, son, and dog. He'll be sharing the inspiring story of the Toro Creek Preserve transformation and how a collaborative effort led to preserving this 3,000-acre coastal property near Morro Bay. Without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Daniel.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You're welcome. Thank you. Well, good evening. As was just said, I'm Daniel Bohlman, Deputy Director at the Land Conservancy, where I have been in a variety of different roles over the 19 years that I've been with the organization. So I've been there quite a while. And tonight I'm going to talk to you about the Toro Coast Preserve. It is not all the way complete, obviously. We're in the various stages, and I'll walk you through that as we go. Also, I should point out that I do like to make these things a bit conversational. So I will likely go through my slides. If there's a burning question that you have, feel free to raise a hand, and we'll address them as we go. You can also save your questions to the end, but know that I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. All right. First, a little bit about the Land Conservancy. Actually, before I say that, let me say one quick thing. All of the images throughout the slideshow, with the exception of, I think, the very last one, all come from the Toro Coast Preserve. So as you are viewing these beautiful images, just know that this is ultimately the view that you will be able to take in while you're hiking out on this property. So a little bit about the Land Conservancy. Land Conservancy was founded in 1984. We are your local land trust. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. And our mission is right here on the board for you. I'll read it all for you all. We conserve and care for the diverse wildlands, farms, and ranches on the Central Coast. We connect people to the land and to each other. That last bit is a relatively new add-on to our mission statement. A few years back, the board of directors and staff, through the strategic planning process, decided that we needed to update our mission statement, in particular in recognition of the importance between the interface of people and the land. Thank you. So we're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, which is very exciting. And in that 40 years, we have conserved, depending on how you count, just shy of 70,000 acres. That's 70, thank you. Yeah, that's, I'm sorry?
What was the sentence? Just shy of 70,000 acres.
Oh, yeah. So the sentence we added was to connect people to the land and to each other. The 70,000 acres, most of those 70,000 acres are what we would refer to as conservation easements. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with conservation easements, but they are, in short, a legal document which essentially works to work with the landowner to protect the land in perpetuity. So it runs with the land and is really a form of legal document that helps us keep land in the hands of farmers and ranchers, but still allowing them to continue to work the land while retiring things like development rights and development pressures, so the ranches and the farms continue to look and operate the way they do today. In some cases, however, we do buy properties in what we would refer to as fee simple. It's the same as if you would buy a home or something like that. You just buy it outright. An example of a property that the Land Conservancy owns and manages in fee is the Obispo Preserve. Show of hands, how many folks have been out on a hike at the Obispo Preserve? All right, that's what I like to see. I expect that kind of turnout for this group. Yeah, so in 2014, we closed that transaction with the help of the community. It was a whirlwind transaction. $12.5 million were raised in just about 8 months to acquire that 880-acre property. The Land Conservancy does continue to own and manage that property today. And that's important because as I talk about the Toro Coast Preserve, we'll make a distinction about who owns and manages the property as we go forward. Prior to that, though, let me just say one last thing about the Land Conservancy. I like to say that we have three legs to our stool: conserve, care, and connect. And it's important that we put equal weight, of course, on a three-legged stool. You don't want to be leaning too far to one side or the other. When we talk about conservation or conserve, that's sort of the bread and butter. It's the thing that you would think of when you think of a land trust. It's the land protection. It's those conservation easements and acquiring land. Care, we do have the good fortune of having a professional restoration staff on staff. These are 20 trained professionals, all with backgrounds in ecology or various forms of botany and other types of restoration skills. And they not only work on our own properties, but we have essentially a for-hire team that can go out and assist the County of San Luis Obispo, the City of San Luis Obispo, and other even private contractors with their restoration needs. A little bit unusual for land trust to have that. And then finally, connect. That's what I'm doing here really tonight, is connecting with you all. Outreach and education is, of course, extremely important to get out the word about the work that we do. And ultimately, there is no better way to connect than to get people out on the land like this.
I have a suggestion.
Yeah.
You might want to put that connect first.
Okay. I'll see what I can do. That's going to take like an act of God to reconvene my board and, get a vote on that. But I appreciate that. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Toro Coast. So Toro Coast, how many people are familiar with this project? Just show of hands. Okay, great. So for many of you, this is going to be pretty familiar territory, but we'll go over it nonetheless. Right located off of Highway 1 and Toro Creek Road between the communities of Morro Bay to the south and Cayucos to the north are 3,000 acres that were acquired by the Texaco Corporation back in the early 1900s. There is, you can just sort of see the pointer there in red. I don't know will it show up? Can you see this if I do this with my cursor? No, you cannot. Doesn't really matter. There are two access points other than off of Highway 1 and Toro Creek Road, and that is a Highway 41 access. It's essentially an access easement through the back part of the Dynegy Corporation land, and then there's a access off of Del Mar Park in North Morro Bay. As I mentioned a moment ago, in the early 1900s, Texaco acquired this 3,000 acres, and they did so to establish their Estero Bay Marine Terminal facility. That facility didn't really actually get underway until 1949. This image that you see here is actually an image from 1949. It's an aerial taken of the tank rings that are up on what they refer to as the hill plant on the Toro Coast facility. And those tank rings were really there to store crude oil that was coming off of ships via pipelines. There used to be a fairly large oil landing pier that would go out. In fact, if you're a surfer, there is a surf spot right there out in front of the property that is frequently referred to as Chevrons.
Call it the oil pier.
Yeah, there you go. It used to be called the oil pier for very good reasons. The operation of the transport and storage of crude oil stopped in the 70s. Site cleanup began in the late 90s. And then in 2001, Chevron, not to acquire this property per se, but acquired Texaco. And as part of the acquisition of Texaco, also came to own this 3,000 acres. I'm glad that the screen is big because this map is relatively small and it's very complicated. Is it okay if I step away from the mic? I'll do my best to project. Okay. So what we're looking at here is the entirety of the 3,000 acres. Everything that you can see in this sort of black dotted line, just disregard the shading for a moment, but that's the entirety of Chevron's land holdings. Again, they've held on to that since the early 1900s. And it wasn't until, well, actually here, I'll move to my next slide. In 2016, Chevron Land and Development, which is a company within a company, if you will, decided to begin the dispossession process of all of these lots. There are literally many, and in fact, every single one of those little tiny tank rings is a legal lot. for better or for worse, and in this case, almost for worse. And they started selling these off. And what happened was, so all these lots that you can see up near the top and then coming through in gray were sold relatively quickly. Those lots were sold to the existing farmers and ranchers who had been leasing from Chevron for a number of years. And then the I'm going to walk over here for a moment. This piece and this piece up here were sold to the Cayucos Sanitation District for their new wastewater treatment facility. The remainder, however, which is about 2,100 acres or so, was still available, and Chevron started to draw up plans for that dispossession. It was right around this time in 2016 that we started to understand their plans. They had plans for subdivisions, they had plans for boutique hotels, all the things that you might expect. And we, and by we, I mean the Land Conservancy of San Luis Obispo County, the Cayucos Land Conservancy, and the Trust for Public Land, along with the County of San Luis Obispo, stepped up and asked for a private meeting with Chevron, wherein we said, we think conservation is a good outcome for this property. And thank you. And we'd like to option the property. For those of you who don't know, option is just a fancy real estate term for putting some money down and sort of taking your chances on whether or not you can raise sufficient funds. We put up a little bit of earnest money and we began the hard work of trying to acquire this property. The plan was to, and still is, to acquire the property in fee. And to do that initially in 4 phases. We've since pared that down to 3 phases. With the long-term hold of the property, meaning the owning, the care and feeding, the stewardship of this property being held by the County of San Luis Obispo as a county park, rather than, for example, a state park. The Land Conservancy of SLO had no interest in owning another large recreational property. We have our hands full with 880 acres at the Pismo Preserve. We certainly don't need 2,000 acres here. And we opted not to entertain state park ownership, largely because state parks has its own management issues with properties. And there are aspects of this property, specifically the beloved dog beach, that is associated with this that would go away if under state parks care, because state parks does not allow dogs. So forget this map because it's a little out of date, but I will walk you through it all the same. Up in the kind of canary yellow there, where it says Lot 1, everything in yellow, including coming down to these beach parcels, is everything that was part of phase 1 of this transaction. Most of phase 1 closed the day, I think, actually, that we got the word that we all needed to work remotely because of the COVID pandemic. I received word from the real estate agent, or our escrow officer, rather, that we had closed that transaction. That transaction closed with the support of Trust for Public Land, as well as the County of San Luis Obispo, Land Conservancy of SLO County, of course, and the Cayucos Land Conservancy. So that piece came along right away. It was our #1 acquisition target for several reasons. One, you notice that it is probably the largest piece of coastal frontage on this map. And the thinking went that if we could only be successful with one part of this project, we should secure the piece that would not only secure all of the coastal frontage along the actual highway to facilitate the county's Cayucos to Morro Bay connector pathway that they're beginning to work on. More on that in a moment. 2, we wanted to ensure that we had scenic viewshed protection so that the communities of Cayucos and Morro Bay would remain distinct from one another and they simply wouldn't merge together in sort of an LA style of coming together. And it just seemed right. It was the lowest price tag, we could get it done, and so we went after it. and we established ourselves successfully with Chevron. The corporation took note, and they decided to entertain a second option for phase 2 of the project. Phase 2 is essentially everything that you see in orange here. It's a little over 750 acres. And this is a particularly auspicious evening because tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, I will be on a Zoom call with the Wildlife Conservation Board wherein they will allocate the remaining $3.5 million required to complete this transaction. Thank you. Yeah, it's been quite a road to get that far. The entire purchase price for this piece is $5.5 million. As I said a moment ago, 3.5 of that is going to be coming from the Wildlife Conservation Board. 1.5 is coming through the State Coastal Conservancy, and the remaining $500,000 is coming from individuals in the community, like yourselves. What's special about phase 2, and the reason that phase 2 is in fact the second phase, is because it holds probably the greatest opportunities for recreation. And of course, that's high on the list of our priorities. What makes that so is that all the remediation from Chevron has already occurred, so the site's completely clean and remediated. And 2, it enjoys access from Del Mar Park. Del Mar Park in North Morro Bay. Any residents from Morro Bay here? Okay, yeah. So hopefully you're familiar with Del Mar Park. Del Mar Park is this green park right here in North Morro Bay, as I said. And there is literally a gate right here adjacent to the parking lot and the restroom facilities and so forth. There's also an existing access road that runs along Avapall Creek all the way to the back. And so in a relatively short fashion, we should be able to open up that gate for visitors coming to Morro Bay so they can recreate on this 750 acres. And then the final piece of the puzzle is going to be the merger here of this purple piece and the red piece, and that will make up phase 3. Phase 3 is not yet in the works. I mean, it's not. We're working on it to the extent that we're working on the transactional end of it, the paperwork side of this. We haven't begun fundraising. One of the issues with phase 3 is that there are, of course, some of the existing outfall pipelines that are still there that need to be remediated. There are the existing shore plant facilities there that need to be repurposed or removed. And so it could be as much as 5 years from now before that is closed. The goal with phase 3 parcels will be to create a low-cost accommodation in the form of camping amenities and RV amenities, as well as day-use parking for those enjoying Dog Beach. Dog Beach right now, for those of you who don't know, Dog Beach is this stretch of beach right along here after the state park ends all the way really up to Cayucos, and very, very popular with users who come obviously with their dogs, and they park right along the side of Highway 1. Once the county builds their connector trail, that parking is likely to go away or to be diminished. Furthermore, it's relatively dangerous parking. It's right off of the highway. Caltrans is not a big fan of that. And so the hope is that we would be able to safely take people onto this parcel and then safely convey them under the overpass there from Toro Creek to Dog Beach, safely and without harm. Yeah, exactly. So if you're familiar with that trail. Yes, in the back.
I have a question. Right now, there are cattle on that piece of property right next to Del Mar Park. Is that a landowner that's still using it for their purposes? Will they be removed or?
Yeah, so did everybody hear the question? So the question is, this property has historically been used for livestock grazing and has really over almost the entire tenure, whether it was Texaco or Chevron. There are 3 cattle leases, meaning there are 3 cattle tenants that have been running livestock on the property. It is my understanding, again, because I'm not going to ultimately be the owner, Chevron will be terminating those cattle leases. The county of San Luis Obispo will be renewing one of those leases with one tenant. And then once a conservation plan is put in place, which will identify management goals long term. They'll look to see whether or not the continuation of livestock on the property is appropriate. It's important to note here, and actually this is a great photo to illustrate this. There are, of course, sensitive resources like the Mariposa lily, which is in this photo, which actually can co-occur with cattle pretty well. One of the issues with livestock grazing in particular is that a system that has been grazed continuously, especially over long periods of time, like 100 years, if cattle are simply removed, what you can expect is a very large influx of weedy species, so fennel and hemlock and mustard and things like that. And so it's one of the things we would caution as ecologists is not simply to remove the cattle pressure, but rather maybe reduce cattle pressure while also implementing restoration approaches. And so the county will be preparing essentially a restoration plan, a conservation plan for the property, which would speak to that.
As long as they're moved, as long as they're electric fence and moved, they
Yeah.
are a tool, they're a restoration tool.
Yeah, you mentioned these enormous prices, $5-point-something million. Back in the 1900s, when this land was acquired, it was stolen from the Indians. What did they pay? 50 cents an acre or something? And then now we're paying, millions of dollars. I mean, interest, incredible interest. How can they do that?
They're a private property owner like anybody else. Now, it is worth mentioning.
That the Shumash, that the indigenous Americans are on the Spanish land grants. They are co-owners if you do a title search all the way back.
Okay. Well, I can tell you that we are working with the Northern Chumash Tribal Council. The county is entering into an MOA with them to make sure that as we talk about management and as we talk about resource protection, that those things are being looked at and cared for. I can also tell you that the negotiated purchase price that we are paying for this property is just that. It is a negotiated price. It is something less than fair market value. So when we work in land conservation, of course, the goal is always to get the most for the least amount of money. But what we can do frequently is negotiate something below appraised or fair market rate. Because we were able to demonstrate to Chevron that there was sufficient interest in the community to see these lands come into conservation, and that we could effectively fundraise and deliver those funds to escrow, they were willing to reduce the purchase price for us to come in. I'd also point out that $5.5 million for coastal California property, 750 acres, is frankly not that much money when you really get down to thinking about it. Okay, so why would we do conservation here? Well, I mean, we've already talked about a lot of this, but open space creation, right? So we all, I think, in this room would agree, especially show of hands, about how many of us have been using the Obispo Preserve. Open space is important. Whether you are out there hiking in it and physically out enjoying it, or whether you're just a beneficiary of looking out at it from a scenic standpoint, we know that open space is important to our well-being. Natural resource conservation, right? Whether it's the Mariposa lily or any number of other beautiful wildflowers that grow out there. There was a stock pond photo that was earlier where there are California red-legged frogs that occur there. Toro Creek is a very important salmonid stream, hosting one of the most robust populations of south central California coast steelhead population. That's a mouthful. And of course, I mentioned already, increased recreation and camping opportunities. Low-cost accommodation is an important thing. As coastal communities become more and more affluent, and as coastal communities still have pressures from visitation, especially from folks who are coming over from the Central Valley to escape heat, they need to find places where they can enjoy these spaces that aren't going to break the bank. One thing that's not on here, but is an important point, is that properties like this can have a very significant economic boost for communities like Morro Bay. Morro Bay is increasingly becoming an economy that is run on tourism and less so as a fishery. And having an adjacent world-class open space can bring people in as a sustainable amenity.
You know why the fishery's not there anymore, right?
I do know why. Yeah.
We don't have any creeks flowing, we don't have any food flowing into the ocean anymore.
I mentioned already effective community separation, right? So we want to make sure that the communities of Morro Bay and Cayucos remain distinct communities. We don't want to see them grow together. And then finally, right-of-way acquisition for the Morro Bay to Cayucos Class 1 connector trail. This is a project that's long been in the works, and until we were actually able to buy the property, Chevron was unwilling to sell an easement over those parcels to allow the county to move forward with this project. Now that the county owns the parcels, they're able to finally move from environmental planning phase all the way into construction. That means that you're going to have a class 1, so a separated paved path, which will allow bikers, pedestrians, folks with strollers, folks in wheelchairs to move safely back and forth between those communities.
When is that gonna happen?
The question was, when is that going to happen? So this is a county project. The county has, I understand, the financial resources by way of a grant, an active transportation grant that they recently received. And so now it's just a function of them putting that out to bid and then starting that process.
Do you know what the path of that is, where that will go through the Toro Creek area? Is it going to be a part of the other bridge that they're going to have to repair here pretty soon?
It won't be part of it, but it'll be adjacent to it.
Adjacent?
Yeah. So, actually, let me see if I might have a photo that might be better. Okay, so here we go. So in this photo, well, it's really nice, really large. You can see that's Cayucos, right? That's Hang Glider Hill here. This would be phase 1 parcels. Of course, that's Dog Beach. I think we're all familiar with this strip of fence that runs along there. This is the same fence that's essentially right about here is where the old oil pier would have been, where you duck under and you take your dog to the beach.
We all went surfing last year because there's no hole in it.
Yeah. This fence more or less designates the Caltrans right-of-way and what are now county-owned parcels. The pathway will follow the fence alignment and will largely be inboard of the fence, meaning to the coastal side of this, right? It can't go into the Caltrans, right? Yeah. Just some pretty photos for everybody as we wrap up. Again, all these photos are taken from on site. This is a spectacular spot right on the top of kind of near the tank rings area. The phase 2 parcels, so this would be coming to a hiking trail near you soon. Good view of Morro Bay. Was there a hand?
What is the motivation for community separation between Cayucos and Morro Bay?
What is the motivation? The motivation is to not see those communities grow together. And in doing so, there's a lot of research that suggests that communities who have distinct kind of identities, if you will, tend to be happier places. And so the merging together not only is a loss of land, but it can in many ways represent a loss of identity for those communities. And so if you, I was just in Los Angeles recently, but actually I was in El Sereno, and El Sereno turns into Alhambra, which turns into downtown Los Angeles, which turns into, I suppose, Hollywood, and then Santa Monica. And the lines between those two communities are literally just a sign. But for that sign, you wouldn't necessarily know that you had transition between one. And so what we would like to do is not only conserve land, obviously for the ecological reasons, but there are pretty compelling reasons to make sure that communities can retain their identities. Another example of this that the Land Conservancy has been working on really almost for the entirety of our 40 years is the communities distinction between the communities of Los Osos and Morro Bay, but also Los Osos and San Luis Obispo. In the instance of San Luis Obispo and Los Osos, not only is there a very distinct community corridor that connects those two, but that corridor is prime agricultural land. And so not only do you want to work towards the conservation and the preservation of those distinct communities, but in doing so you can really preserve prime farmland, which is, they're not making any more of it.
Have they thought about a class 1 bike lane as part of that designation? Is there any off-the-road bike lanes similar to what we see from in Carpinteria down to Ventura area? Is there any of that in the works?
Yeah, so that is exactly what they're going to be building
Okay, good.
between Cayucos and Morro Bay. It would be shared, right? It wouldn't be just exclusive use for bike, but like there, and I haven't seen the final design, but like there, I imagine there would likely be a pedestrian side and a cyclist side. Yeah.
Thank you
Will
very
that
much.
eventually be part of the California Coastal Trail?
Oh yes. Yeah. So a big part of the reason.
Meetings, and yeah, that's what they're gonna do.
Yeah, so a big part of the reason that the State Coastal Conservancy is so supportive of this project is because of the coastal trail.
Dan?
Yeah. Oh, hey, John.
Which historic sites do you have on this property that are worthy of preservation, and whether or not there are some cultural sites there that maybe shouldn't be acknowledged and talked about? Because I do know there's up Toro Creek, there's a community of Solinan Indians that live there as well. Have they been engaged in this process too?
They have. As you can imagine, working through the process, both locally and at the state level, of course, we want to do this voluntarily, but of course, we're oftentimes compelled, nonetheless, to engage with these communities. Your point's a good one. There are many cultural resource sites up and down this. Somebody over here mentioned, of course, that there was a long history of occupation by Native Americans on this site. You can't have thousands of years of occupation without having thousands of years of accumulated cultural resources. And so one of the primary things that we will need to do prior to, and by we, I essentially mean the county, because ultimately they will be the ones in charge of doing this, are going to have to do a cultural resource survey with those communities, those indigenous peoples, to identify where those particularly sensitive sites are. And that's essentially a no-go zone, right? So up Toro Creek is there are a number of, I think, fairly well-established, fairly well-known sites that will have zero public access associated with them, unless, of course, you're a member of one of those tribal affiliations. I hesitate to speak about cultural resources for the obvious reason that, one, I'm not an expert, but two, sad as it is to say, and I don't know a better way to say this, but cultural resource robbing, grave robbing, things like that still occur to this day. And so we have to be very sensitive when we talk about the location of these things and the nature of them. I'm wrapping up here. I do want to really give a big shout out to all of our major project partners. Wildlife Conservation Board, as I mentioned, tomorrow morning, knock on wood, we'll be getting the last piece of the puzzle for phase 2. That project, provided we get that piece tomorrow, and I think that we will, we are pushing for a calendar year close of this calendar year, so in just about a month's time. State Coastal Conservancy, of course, has been a longtime champion of projects like this. The County of San Luis Obispo is really stepped up and has taken on the role of owner-manager. The Cayucos Land Conservancy is a small little land trust in Cayucos, but has done very, very big things, not only for Cayucos, but for this project. Trust for Public Land has kind of stepped away, but they were initially very instrumental in helping us prepare for the phase 1 acquisition, and I think we demonstrated that locally we could do this project without them. Not to say we didn't appreciate them, and so they've let us take the reins. And then finally, this is fun. There's a relatively new open space group in Morro Bay called the Morro Bay Open Space Alliance, and MBOSA, as we like to refer to them, has really stepped up and taken an active role in fundraising in the Morro Bay community for this project. So definitely want to acknowledge them as well. And with that, here's the only photo that I have that's not from the property, though could very easily be. So a couple of barn owls for you. My contact information is there. Thank you all. You've been a wonderful, attentive audience. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah, let's start here. Thank you.
Do you have any photos of actual water flowing down Toro Creek? And is Toro Creek a constant flow of water or only during rains or?
Yeah, so Toro Creek flow is essentially a perennial blue line stream. It has, of course, the flow changes seasonally depending on how much rainfall it has. There is, however, because now with the sanitation district, there will be water kind of being perpetually put back in there to keep it a wetted surface. So Toro Creek is a creek that runs more or less year round. In the winter months, you will find that it punches through the sand and, of course, makes its way to the ocean so the salmonids can run. Alvopol Creek is an ephemeral drainage, so that only runs. Alvopol Creek, if I back up here for a moment, is the drain. Here, I can see it on this map. Alvopol is right here, this creek here, and all those tributaries. Toro Creek is this blue line. Alvopol. Yeah, Alvopol. I assume it's.
Spell it, please.
Can I spell it? Sure. A-L-V-A, one word, and then Paul, like the name Paul. P-A-U-L. I assume it was named after an individual. I don't know the history of it. But Alvopol Creek is an ephemeral drainage, meaning it only flows in the winter months.
Now,
Yes.
Are any of these lands open to the public yet? And if not, will they be soon?
So the question was, are any of these open to the public yet? All of the coastal properties that were part of Phase 1 are open to the public now. You can go on them, except for the interior side, which is there's really no way to access those properties. It's where cattle continue to roam. Those properties, however, have been being used by the public for really forever. It's just been a form of trespass that was kind of allowed by Chevron. Now it's essentially a legal form of access because the county owns and operates it as a county park. Phase 2 in orange is the property that will close ideally by the end of this calendar year, after which time the county will have to prepare some plans and build some trails to accommodate public, but because of its adjacency to Del Mar Park, the parking facility and the restroom facilities there, as well as the fact that there's a road and a gate, that property could be open to the public in as short as a year, more likely than not, maybe 2 years time. Yeah, same tape.
Are there any trails along Toro Creek?
There are no trails along Toro Creek that I'm aware of. It's mostly the creek itself. There's a road, of course, along Toro Creek Road is right there. There, along Alvopol Creek, there is an existing, what I would categorize as a range road that is fairly well maintained and was up until recently directly adjacent to an above ground pipeline. That pipeline was removed last summer. The road exists, but the pipeline is, and all of its infrastructure is now gone. Yes?
So I'm trying to imagine how the property would be connected once all those phases are together, because the yellow and the purple won't be connected initially, but you're saying the yellow and the red will?
The yellow and the red will only become connected when purple comes along with it, right? So orange will be a public access amenity sooner than later, as just discussed a moment ago, about 750 acres. Yellow is serving an important purpose for that Class 1 connector trail right now. And when Phase 3, which is purple and red together, close, best guess on that, maybe 5 years' time, then the whole works gets connected together. They stand alone, though, and they serve purposes outside of themselves, and that's why they were phased the way they were. Yeah, let's go to the back, and then I'll come back to you.
This is a very helpful presentation, and I'm wondering what you may have learned from this property acquisition and negotiation that might in any way inform the a little further south of there, what Morro Bay is grappling with regard to what to do about the tank farms that have removed from that area. You got tank farms removed from here. Any insights or perspectives about, what might be done in that kind of environment beyond, where they're proposing the battery storage or other alternatives?
Yeah, I mean, I will say this, and this surprises a lot of folks. It even surprises me. But Chevron has, at the end of the day, been a very good partner. They're not always the easiest to work with, and in fact, in many cases, they can be a complete pain in the butt because they have to send everything to Houston, where a bevy of lawyers has to look over it and so forth. But I will give them credit for hearing us out in 2016 when we approached them and said, we think conservation is the way to go here, and here's why. And I will also give them credit for the patience that they've exhibited. Conservation is a very slow thing, right? We are raising funds by writing grants. We are raising funds by going out and meeting with individuals like yourself, right? And we have to raise, at the end of the day, we're going to have raised, if I'm guessing here, $18 million thereabouts to acquire everything. That takes time. And a corporation like Chevron is not usually interested in delay, right? They're interested in shareholder returns and things like that. And that's probably true in corporate headquarters in Texas. But here locally, the two land agents that I work with, I think have done a very good job of conveying the importance of this property to the community and conservation as the best outcome. And I say this because you wouldn't automatically think that. You wouldn't automatically think that there's a path forward to have that dialogue and arrive at a place where you can kind of come to agreement on properties. And so the takeaway that I have to answer your question is, it's always worth sitting down and having the conversation and trying to articulate the vision and trying to just, demonstrate that you're able to pull something like this off for the benefit of the community. And they've really come around to seeing that. Yeah, thank you. Over here.
So I had two questions. The first one, there's what appears to be a privately owned parcel of land, basically the south bank of Toro Creek, in between phase 1 and phase 3. That piece of privately owned land that sort of sticks in the middle there
This one?
is essentially going to be an in-holding
Mm-hmm.
once the other acquisitions are completed. Have you had discussions with that property owner?
Yeah, so that property owner is the Cayuga Sanitation District.
Okay.
They were among the very first properties. If I go back to this map, you'll see, remember those properties in gray, including them.
Right.
They came in. Now, what's good about them as a landowner or an in-holding owner, if you will, is that they of course have their sanitation facility there, but that sanitation facility creates water and it can handle wastewater. And so actually, as far as neighbors go, they're a pretty good neighbor to have for a facility that will have both wastewater generation and water needs.
Well, you don't have to buy it, because it's already in public ownership. And if you're gonna do some restoration on Toro Creek, which is desperately needed, you're gonna need to have access to the creek there.
And we will, yeah.
My second question was, if you go back to the other map, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're
Right
fine.
there. So there's sort of a dog leg of parcels behind the North Morro Bay neighborhood there. Are those the quote residential parcels that the city's been trying to sell off, but receiving lots of pushback from the neighbors about
Yeah.
geological issues and things like that?
Yeah. So can everybody hear me okay when I'm step away from the mic? All right, great. So these lots right here
Right.
are the so-called panorama lots. Okay, and they're called that because they lie adjacent to Panorama Drive, I think it's what it is in North Morro Bay. These lots are owned by Chevron and have been sold separately. They've been sold off to a developer. We could have bought these as part of this larger conservation transaction. The reason we didn't buy them is because there's an opportunity for residential development tight to panorama. And because of that, each one of these, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's about $1 million lot. So I could have spent $5 million on those 5 lots that are incredibly steep, have no public access, they're geologically unstable. Or I could have spent that same $5 million on the 750 acres in Orange.
You're way better off maintaining that as a buffer between your
Yeah.
residential areas and your open space.
So at some point in my conversation, I said this thing, which I say frequently, is that one of the goals of conservation is to get the most for the least, right? And this is a good example of that. There's limited funding available, and you have to, were it up to me, I would have bought all 3,000 acres, and I would have made it all a big park. But that's not the way it works, and that's not the way Chevron needed to see some immediate cash return. We needed to start to look at strategically where are the things that are going to best serve the community, and those panorama lots simply didn't serve the community in the same way that the other parcels would.
That was a good decision.
Not everybody thinks that, but I appreciate it. Yeah.
For all the remaining oil infrastructure that's there, who's going to be responsible for removing that stuff and remediating whatever contaminations there?
Yeah. So the question is, of the existing infrastructure from the oil days that exists on site, who's responsible for that? Who's going to take care of it? And the answer is Chevron. And so part of the reason that phase 3 is because that is really where the bulk of the remaining infrastructure from the facility, both the shore plant and the hill plant, still exist and hence still need to be remediated. Now, they've been doing remediation for 30 years. There still is some there, but it is getting better and better and better. It's just not yet ready. The property here along Avapaul Creek, I mentioned a moment ago that last year, the last of that above ground pipeline was removed, and that was the last part of the remediation from that. They've done everything else that they needed to do. And I should point out that it's not just them, Chevron or Texaco or whomever, saying, oh, we're good, we did it. There are agencies who are taking soil cores and things like that to actually verify that the remediation is done to compliant standard, right? Chevron is not legally allowed to dispossess properties that still have remediation requirements like this unless the person buying it is willing to assume those liabilities. Of course, the county is not going to do that. Furthermore, the county has a perpetual indemnification clause in here, so should any hydrocarbons or pollutants like that come up in the soil, Chevron will still be on the hook to come back in and clean those up.
What's going to happen with there's 2 existing pipelines there still under the sand on the south side of the bridge that get exposed every once in a while?
There are some pipelines that are outfall pipelines that run out into the ocean, and 2 of those pipes are being used by the sanitation district. So they're actually pumping their wastewater or some portion of it out into the ocean. The other 2, I think, they're looking at some additional uses, the county, so they will remain in place. Yeah, next.
Yeah, you mentioned requirements. Are those and regulations about remediation and whatnot, are those federal requirements? And if so, are there any other federal, requirements or things that might go wrong with the new administration coming up? With
Yeah.
all these plans?
I see. They're largely state requirements, so and that's a good thing. So as I think everybody in this room is aware, oftentimes the way law works is there can be 2 sets of law. There can be a federal or a state set of laws, and you would go to the superior law, right? And in the state of California, it's vastly superior in terms of its requirements. And so the agency who's largely overseeing this would be the Regional Water Quality Control Board and groups like that, which are state agencies. Any other questions? Okay, one more.
I have one last question, which is how can this group of wonderful people support y'all? And what is the best way to do that in the phase you're at right now?
I love that question. It's like,
Awesome, isn't it?
yeah. So did everybody hear? How can you support the project and how can you support us? It's the same. It would be the same pitch that you know you would give to the same group of people, which is, you know, we are a nonprofit, right? So you know whether you want to donate to the project directly, right? If you want to write in the memo of your check or however Toro Coast Preserve. All that money, 100% of it will go right to the acquisition of this property. If, on the other hand, you're willing to support the Land Conservancy in general and the work that we do, both here as well as elsewhere, whether that's the large Kamada Ranch conservation easement that we've done or all the work, all that almost 70,000 acres we've done over the last 40 years, you can simply write a donation, general membership check to the Land Conservancy, and we will be so grateful for that. Yeah.
Is there going to be public comment, public feedback, presentations for this before the plan is finalized?
Almost certainly, yeah. So
Are they around the event?
again, well, yeah. So acquisition has to happen. So the question was, will there be public comment about planning and how the property will be used? The County of San Luis Obispo, not surprisingly, cannot invest staff time and resources for property they don't own. So until they own it, they can't start planning for it, right? If we're lucky and if everything goes right, they will own that piece in orange by January 1 of 2025. And it's at that point that they can start that process. That's a long process, right? And it's a process that will almost certainly have public input to it. It is a county process, however, it's not something that I control.
It has to have public input by law, doesn't it?
I would guess, but I don't know. Yeah, there was one question in the back.
This may be way off the wall, but have you been able to get like any funding at all, like from the IRA, you know, to meet like the 30-30 designation, you know, federal-wise or state-wise?
Yeah, so the 30 by 30 initiative, our 30% of our land conserved by 2030. These are all statewide or even federal. Of course, in the state of California, we're really taking it seriously. That money, right, is being allocated through those funding agencies that you saw on the second to last slide, right? So even like Proposition 4, which just passed, which would have allocated, I think, what is it, 10 or $20 billion, right, for a variety of things. The way in which this works is that those agencies are the receivers of those funds, right? They put them into buckets for the various purposes, and then organizations like myself write grants to them for, you know, hopefully that are in alignment with the goals, and then we implement. So 100% the money that is coming to this project there's a bucket there somewhere where they're going to check a box that says this is helping to meet our goals.
I mean, they're gonna put the rest of the IRA funds out there. So now's really gonna be a good time to stand on top of it.
We're on top of it.
Happy here.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Yeah, one last.
One more question about wild animals. What wild animals are passing through this track?
Oh boy, that's a fun question. I wish I had some of the fantastic photography from this. So I don't.
Cams, are you gonna put up any video cameras?
We always do camera traps on properties, especially when we talk about stewardship. You know, one of the things, if you want to talk about stewardship, the thing that I'm fond of saying is, if you're going to be a good steward, you need to know what you're stewarding, right? So you need to know what's there. Some things don't run away, like a Mariposa lily. It just grows out of the ground. It's pretty easy. Other things, like mountain lions and bobcats and coyotes and bears and things like that, are certainly passing through this property. One of the reasons that we work in this area is not just because it's beautiful and it's coastal, but because, and I don't have a map to illustrate this, and maybe I can come back in another presentation.
Okay.
But if we were to draw a line between the Ventana Wilderness of southern Big Sur and the Los Padres National Forest, it crosses the region of our county that we would refer to as the Adelaide. And this property is really sort of in the southwest corner of that Adelaide region. And so it's a very significant wildlife corridor. If you're a mountain lion in, leaving the Silver Peak Wilderness or Ventana Wilderness, you could walk from that region all the way really to the Mojave with relatively free of obstruction because of these corridors. And one of our overarching goals at the Conservancy has been to identify and conserve properties along that corridor, right? This complies with that. It just happens to have the added benefit of excellent access, excellent recreation, et cetera.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.